The story begins as a woman in a wedding dress slowly went with a crown hall. On the side stood protection in full armor. Men did not move, and often the impression was that it was simply statues. Her name was the captain, and she was the princess of the kingdom of the Suyat. Nobody responded to her words, although the princess knew that her fiancé had to be present here. The marriage was calculated, so you should not expect feelings. In the hands of the bride, there was a box of wood. The girl said she came here for the sake of becoming a queen of the kingdom of evening darkness. But her words were sank again in silence. The security was as if the girl did not exist. Finally, before the eyes, the captain was set a throne, which stood on the rise to which the stairs led. On the stairs and on the throne it was possible to distinguish silhouettes of people. They sat and lay or were in different poses. The man sitting on the throne had one mechanical hands. A beautiful semi-naked girl sat around his feet. The king asked what his bride was talking about. The beauty at his feet replied that the captain wanted to become a queen. The princess was walking the hall. The views of all present were chained to her. Women said that this new can sing and be able to sing a lot, and they are only good for the bodily comfort and entertainment of their master. Finally, the captain came to the king. He compressed her neck with his mechanical hand. They said that in such a light dress it was easy to freeze outside during the cold. Namely, this fate awaits a brand new. The king was angry. He guessed that a small country which is on the verge of death sends its princess to escape from neighboring encroachments. To hope for the union and salvation was a nonsense. The girl reminds that they once had a secret agreement regarding that she would become a bride of the king. He replied that there was something like that, but now it's a promise of a dead princess. He stressed that he is now the lord of this region, the kingdom of darkness, and the princess will become his new slave, his toy, and the subject for comfort. The king was called Othello from now on, and he was a cruel ruler. One of the court ladies of the king carried a captive iron collar. The woman said he was specially performed for the princess, and now it will become her decoration for a long time. The girl was actually scared. It has not yet been clear. Strong hands grabbed the poor and put on her neck a collar. The girl tried to resist, but she was held firmly. She tried to jam to her tormentors and insisted that she was a princess and a respectable person. The captain did not lose hope to remove the collar. However, it was now that it was too late to do it. The girl shouted loudly that she would not sit on the chain because the princess and the future Queen Usis. But the man did not consider it. He tightly squeezed a chain with a collar, and I was in a time that the only way out of the situation is that the girl would become his new favorite and won the right to remove shackles. The girl did not realize that before her visit, 2 royal houses of neighboring states also sent her daughters as a princess. They became the new mistresses of Wisa. These girls were definitely smarter than the captain. The princess realized that her fiancé, for whom her father and brother full of psycho gave her, he forced girls from noble families to abandon his honor and to become simple toys to satisfy Uis. 2 days before this wedding, the girl dreamed of scary and strange dreams. At that time, she did not understand what happened around. Fate tried to convey the capture of the capture through dreams that they should not be trusted by the father. By that moment, the girl did not feel anything like that happened in a dream. She did not have many options. After all, her father died, leaving her half of her wealth. The other part went to stepmother and her daughter. On the eve of the wedding, who had to happen to a guy she met for 5 years, it turned out that he met with her erected sister. I shocked the news and hit the ill-advised act. These 2 planned to wait for the moment when she was entitled to inheritance and then put her accident. The guy, whom the girl trusted in every possible way, killed her faith in the future and all the light in people. After he would take possession of the bride's property, the scoundrel should have left the insurance payments he had to receive for the bride's death. The cunning plan was only his baby, and his sister came to it. Because of her naivety, the girl could not believe that her sister and stepmother would cook something bad. They divided the estates and property equally and had no claims. However, her sister put her pig. Until the last, she thought that they fell in love with one water at first sight. But only she thought. In fact, he cunningly manipulated it and tried to enrich himself at her expense. She was not going to put up with this fact. The day that was to be the best in her life, the girl suffered at this time as he had never. It was just that it was not fashionable to leave this. Anger demanded revenge and reckoning. The princess lay on the floor. She was still dressed in a wedding dress. There were shackles on her hands, and a heavy iron collar was hung on her neck, which rubbed the skin in that place. The girl was crying. But even in this situation, there was something that reassured her. She was alive. After an accident in her past life, which happened immediately after she learned the truth about the groom and his mistress. A woman who was mocking her and wearing a collar came into the room where the captain was lying. The favorite of the king said she was really surprised because she planned to throw away the girl's body, and it still lasted. The princess was lost. She did not want to suffer and feel pain on that day. It was her wedding day. The girl already realized that her soul moved in a strange way to another body. It seemed that the head was flaking. The stranger, meanwhile, approached, holding the candlestick. She said she was called Liv. She was the ruler's favorite. The captain did not immediately understand who went to the language, and whom the woman called the ruler. Red-haired said that of course it meant Otis Othello. It was he who was the real master of the kingdom and the ruler of all living things in his lands. He was also the owner of a women's harem. Liv asked why the girl was looking so carefully at her, whether the woman was so scary and ugly. However, the captain thought quite differently. The beauty of the stranger, on the contrary, was too and caused bad feelings. The favorite of the king asked whether the girl lost not only consciousness, but also part of the brains. Then she struck the poor. Liv asked if the girl was dared to take the place of the ruler and move it. After beating, the girl lost consciousness for a short time. When she came to her senses, she realized that her head was torn into pieces, but suddenly she noticed shackles and a collar. It was like a nightmare. Liv was nearby. The captain did not see her, but the woman opened a bottle with a strange liquid. The king's favorite said that Othello started playing an adult in the garden, but the girl will not survive in the morning with this character. Othello's favorite poured a cap in the throat, but she coughed and fell to the floor. She still thought about what a woman told her, but she assured that the girl's suffering would not last long. The king came to the room. He called leave. The woman pretended not to do nothing. She explained that she just put a stain on the dress until she raised the girl, but now she is ready to go to the garden. The captain shouted after Parry, who came out of the dungeon. The girl asked that leave had poured into her mouth. The favorite wondered why the princess was still alive. Usually the poison acts much faster. The girl shook. Liv told the king that a stubborn girl still dreams of a wedding night with his highness. Therefore, she is very angry that this may not happen. Both looked carefully at the prisoners. However, Othello remained unmoved. The captain tried to pull the collar, but she was not going to be in such a state. If the girl is destined to die, she will do it standing. The captain hesitated whether it was worth doing. The king called her a prostitute. The assistant was detached from the conversation and the bullying of the king's girl. He recalled that Loden needs a report on hostilities. Othello ordered to wait for it and not distract him from raising a bad girl. Othello dragged the captain. He held a chain with a girl firmly, but she wandered for his lord. The king called her a bad dog and threatened to deal with her very rigidly and with feeling. The girl thought about who they called Lundes. The king remembered that it was thanks to him that the kingdom is a very wide and long coastline. It is not necessary to despise him and provoke an ally. His Highness told that the girl's native kingdom was very small and lived only through the development of the farm. The same father of the princess tried to conclude a peace treaty at her expense. Othello considered her intentions to become a queen very self-confident. She never get this status. Her father was one of the numerous small kings who were very many at the time of the war on the continent. The girl saw people in the garden in masks, still silhouettes hid in the dark among the trees. The king told that it was his garden for slaves and toys, the same place for the capture. His slaves are energetic and will teach it something. Othello leaned to her and said that she could choose whom she wants. The captain became embarrassed and scary among these people. She hoped that something human was still preserved. The girl did not want to be here. The king said that this night the girl would definitely not forget. She is etched in her memory for a long time, but she had to worry. Soon she will dream of Ave. Every night she becomes like a similar one and repeated. From the pushing captain, he went down very quickly to the garden. They were already waiting for her. She saw the predatory eyes under the masks of slaves. People were influenced by something that helped HM to break away from reality. Men with shackles surrounded the captain. The strangers rejoiced that they got a girl from a pupil. It promised them a great entertainment and much interesting things that will happen for the night. They discussed its appearance. The lusty hands reached for the girl. She was tried to grasp and humiliate in every possible way. Someone ordered her to behave humble and then nothing wrong would happen. Another man asked to lick her legs and make it nice. The captain began to cry. She begged to stop, but her hands stretched to her. The girl lost her last hope that she will be released. The princess wondered how she was in this position. She tried to flee through the garden. The girl thought that she saw only in nightmares. But at the same time, the names seemed familiar to her, as if she had heard or read them somewhere. According to thought, the girl fell. She hurt. The air came out of the lungs. It seemed like a moment and it would lose consciousness and fall into the void. But she detained her in reality, the noise of water nearby. She looked and noticed her husband's torso. The body was muscular. On the skin, traces of beating and scars were seen in a mask. He wiped his body and carefully cleaned it from something. The captain was watching him. He either did not see the girl or pretended not to see her. The princess realized that something terrible would happen now and asked her to help her, but her voice interrupted the noise of water. The man in the mask with horns looked closely around. He heard a strange sound like a person's voice. The stranger finished his procedures and looked around, but I did not see anyone. Women and girls from the harem were around their lord. One of the favorites asked how many animals, the slaves of the king, the slaves will eat today. A girl, a princess who recently got to the Garden of Corruption. The man replied that once he really wanted to marry a girl with a suyat. However, now it happens that his desire is annexed. He saw the self, confidence and worthlessness of the people there and its rulers. His Highness believed that at dawn he could punish his bride death, but the favorite assured that it was not necessary to hurry. In this way, they will not receive a princess downtime and will be damaged. The favorite decided to go for a trick. She asked if Othello would not use a beautiful young girl. However, he replied that he prefers women such as Liv. But she was happy about what he heard. In the memories of the king suddenly emerged the image of the captain, which began to call him bad words. For some reason, it was even sad for him. After all, the girl lost interest in him so quickly. It affected him. The princess, meanwhile, lay around the pool. She screamed and asked to help. The man in the horned mask saw her. The girl regretted that she did not feel the body, and the heat spread the body and burned it unbearably. The cape realized that a strange poison gave her a lion. The girl could not believe that she would die again now. This time it is finally. God or the universe has no habits to give many chances to be shaped that they cannot use them. The smell of blood came from the man in the water. He was all in scars and bruises. His appearance was indomitable, though he saw a princess who asked for help. This stranger belonged to slaves, but was different from them. The man suddenly had a sword. This meant that it was by no means slave. Only nobles and aristocracy were entitled to wear weapons. The same nobleman was squeezed into the garden with slaves. 2 slaves who finally found the captain were going to flee. They had no desire to meet a nobleman who could easily kill them, and not to punish any punishment for such an act. The stranger in the mask was approaching the girl. He examined her body carefully. The princess lay on the ground and could not move. She asked not to approach her from her last. The man was carried by blood. The aristocrat in the horned mask asked the captain why it was lying on the surface. In his opinion, she was injured. The girl replied that she was a princess from the Suyat and asked not to defile her body. The stranger sat in the girl. He said that the king despises the Sadi and does not seek peace with him or receive friendly assistance from the ally. The same capture does not shine to become a queen. The man continued to speak until the girl looked at his strong physique enthusiastically. He said that in order to turn the princess, the king would ruin her before. The slaves may have done it with her. The stranger took her in his arms and carried it. On the way, he said that if relatives love and respect her, they would search for her. If this is not the case, then she is doomed to unenviable. Suddenly, he asked if the girl wanted her husband to take her. Can she expect it to leave it in this place? The captain leaned against him and wept. She begged to save her. The girl begged for salvation. The princess asked how the name of the man who saved her. He called Gamerville, but she asked what he wanted from this night. He was silent. Then he asked how the girl is called and what she wanted, but she was delayed. After short hesitation, she said she would like to be a queen, not a slave. But then she said she was seeking something else, but because of the fever, she says nonsense and behaved very strange. The man looked at his new acquaintance even more carefully and focusedly. She said she did not want to be deceived and suffer in a similar place with scum and psychopaths, and does not want to be abandoned. The stranger put a girl carefully on the ground. He asked to wait a little. He also asked nothing to be afraid, because in any case he would protect her and come to the rescue in case of danger. The man took the sword. His plan was strange to the captain. She did not want him to leave her alone. So now something had to happen that she couldn't even guess. But in fact, she was surprised in the future. A strong and accurate blow to the sword, a man in a mask cut off shackles, and a chain that were on the girl. He rejected the chains and said that from that time everything would be the way she told him. She can believe him. The stranger brought the girl to his palace. He put her on the bed. The girl asked to help her. The captain really wanted to drink. The man reassured her. The poor was influenced by the drugs that Lion gave her. Over time, this woman began to be angry more and more. The cape said she was feeling very strange. It was most likely a consequence of drugs. Her body has a hard time tolerated. The girl took the rescuer by her hand. She tried to draw him closer and look into her eyes and see her hero's face. He hesitated. He looked at the girl he rescued for a long time and has now felt a duty to take care of her. With a quick movement, the man removed the mask. Below it was a very beautiful and attractive face. The captain was pleasantly surprised by this discovery. She even believed that she could now fall asleep and die. The stranger leaned and passionately kissed the girl. She did not expect it. However, she responded to his tenderness. They kissed greedily and gently that none of them expected this evening. Armed with a sword of a young man running through the forest, he reported that the orcs attacked their military camp in Wallin. The attacks of enemies will not stop, and the military were, and so was a few months ago. The king had to intervene. As a result of his delay and unwillingness to give money to the military company, his possession suffers. The man who was the commander said he tried to get to his majesty even in the harem. The assistant tightly tightened the armor of the man and at the same time reminded that the knight was very risky when he made his way to the garden of the king. His highness was a very suspicious man and very unpredictable. A similar punch could cost the commander's life, but he interrupted the assistant. The knight said he planned to bring one woman with him. The same servant had to help him in this and tell anyone nothing. Both walked in front of the castle. The assistant knight asked who the stranger was, but in fact it was not important. Whoever a stranger may be, bringing it with you was a bad idea to travel. The assistant was still talking. He emphasized that the knight had no rights to speak with her. In this case, it can simply kill it. Othello was very jealous of his subordinates and slaves. The knight ordered to silence. He recalled that they have for 5 days to return. Already on the road, the young man thought that a woman had to be really beautiful to win his master's heart. The captain finally realized that he was in the book. After all the absurdity that happened to her, she felt that she was well aware of all the events that took place around. Names and names pointed to a familiar plot. In her past life, she read this book. It was a rather dark and cozy biographical novel. It was called Lowen's Great. The book was unpopular. It was difficult to find information about it. Sometimes even the impression was that the girl was the only one who read this work of art. But nevertheless, she really liked the plot and all the actors and characters of the work. She did not chase in popularity. The girl also remembered the events that preceded her wedding and catastrophe, which then happened, because of what happened. She got to the body of Princess Suyata Gamerville Cape, and that is why she has to live in the world of books. She was able to understand Deso because she received part of the girl's memories and thoughts. In fact, her character was not the main effective face of this work. Her tragic life is only mentioned in the book. Captus was the king's illegitimate child. The same after it became an adult, she was crowned and sent as a bride to the kingdom of eternal darkness. At that time, his father needed an alliance with this state. But the king of eternal darkness hated the Sites, who was weak and only prevented him from mastery of the continent. The same Adel did not hung up the Suya and its inhabitants, and the princess and her father just despised. The man did so that after the wedding, everyone started calling bad words and gossip about her uncontrollability in matters of men. A few months later, she was slandered and punished on a guillotine. Relatives and subjects from the Suyat did not consider the loss of the princess grief for themselves. No one even thought about revenge on the abusers. On the contrary, they believed that it was worth displaying her so that it was not ashamed of her. And only the main character of the book, Loden is Great, was able to throw away the tyrant with the throne in efforts to combine the continent. And only a few days later, the girl's character was rehabilitated and justified. The captain viewed herself in the mirror. She believed that there was no sense after death to justify her life. It is worth living in order to take revenge and destroy the freaks that offended it over time. The girl came to the conclusion that from now on she will live as she sees fit, and it will not let anyone offend it. She was delighted with her appearance again. This was not surprising because she is a princess. Only the wound from the chains and the collar spoiled. However, those who have done it will pay for their evil intentions and actions. The captain will destroy the left and take revenge on her poison and deadly torment. The girl remembered the events last night. Then a man took her in his arms and took her out of the garden, where there were full slaves, ready to attack her and do various bad things with her. She had to thank the savior. The captess regretted that she did not even ask the name of her rescuer because of the drug. She even remembered what he looks like. The only element was the mask that hid his face. The girl thought if he could be a slave. However, she immediately rejected this opinion. After all, none of the slaves would give weapons. The same was the aristocrat. But what he did in this place? Othello has severely punished for disobedience. The girl thought that she would like to see a rescuer again. The stranger brought her to his palace. So soon she will know who she got to and to whom her salvation and life. At this time, Ladus was struggling with enemies. The orcs could capture the entire continent. The knight could not allow the king's buzzing, and his weakness forced the people to die. There was no army. The hero defended himself. In this he, however, was assisted by his loyal assistant. But this time they really realized that there are too many enemies, but the knight assured that it was just a lot of enemies. This time, many clans of orcs united. Loans reported that many aristocrats and nobles left the service because the king had lost most of the funds allocated for war. You can only rely on your own detachment of warriors and soldiers. The assistant said they could also just retreat. No one will blame them, and they will retain health and some of their uniforms. But his chief was against such developments. The knight assured that all their efforts are aimed at saving the people and helping ordinary people who cannot protect themselves. It was not a job, but their holy duty. But in the words of the young man, there was truth. He said that when the borderline defense is broken, all cities that were near will fall. The same mother will not be delighted with the fact that the son has allowed it. She will be ashamed of him and his service. A group of girls and women approached the castle. They searched for Princess Suyat. Someone doubted that the girl would be hiding in a snow castle, but one of the girls replied that they were not looking for in this place. Liv was accompanied by a girl who was still very naive. She said she heard terrible stories about this castle and ghosts that lived there, but the favorite was firm in its decisions. Her order was the law. At this time, the captain stood in front of the mirror and inspected her dress. It was torn in some places and had a bad look. The girl wanted to dress in something else. The wedding dress worried her. The girl heard a strange, loud noise. 2 women ran into the room. They said nothing, but simply ordered to follow them. The captain was naked. After all, she did not want to leave this room where she felt safe. But women firmly grabbed the girl's hands and pulled behind. The poor man resisted and tried not to succumb to strangers. But 2 women were stronger than Princess Suyat, and the girl suffered. They threw it out of the building. The left was right above the captain. The woman was satisfied with the result of her searches. The favorite continued to do with it. She said the girl was not like the princess. She is ashamed of the Suyat. Captus thought that in the book much later after the visit to Othello, the princess would be punched and punished. However, the events now have developed much faster than the described. You should think of how to act in this situation. The princess remembered the conversation in the garden with yesterday's rescuer. She has now fully agreed with him about what awaits her in the future. The prospects were poorly not desirable. The princess was again brought to the throne hall, in which it was from the beginning. But now it happened that there were no many slaves that scared it. The king was still sitting in his place and looked at the top. Othello looked carefully at his captive. He asked who his bride slept with that night. It was evident that he provokes poor, but the captain decided to hold on and not to show her fear or delay. Under the look of Liv, many men of slaves said they spent this night with the princess. With each instant, their number increased. The girl became very painful. Everyone was lying about her. The Cape realized that her patron was right. From the very beginning, they try to put it in a bad light, but it is not necessary to boil what she is angry. It can be considered as evidence of her actions. Othello looked at the girl sarcastically. He asked if he liked his bride and the future queen to be in the company of slaves who made her with their toy and did everything with her that they wanted their fantasy. The Cape said she did not spend this night, but she does not admit who it was, although a mysterious savior stood before the girl's eyes. She was even pleased to mention what had happened. Liv came to her. She said that the girl simply has no conscience. It is very inflammatory and quite ambitious, to which the captain replied that she was a princess and has every right. She added she really slept with her husband. The question of everyone around, the princess answered that the man did not belong to the king's slaves. Her rescuer was the best even than the ruler of the Dark Lands. These words were angry and affected by Othello. The captain pointed her finger on the left and said she spent the night with her. The favorite was surprised. She did not expect it, and the girl believed that she would still die, and finally you could have fun and break away. This trick of the princess cheered the king. He laughed loudly and laughed for the whole hall. Servants have not seen him for a long time. Othello called the girl crazy and ordered to stop and say nothing like this. The man was delighted that for the first time someone was not afraid of him, but tried to even joke or say nonsense in his presence. But the captain was not going to silence. She said she had no evidence. Many said today that spent the night with her, but to say exactly what they did, no one will decide. It will be frank lies. But the evidence of the joint night from the lions were in the hands of the favorite itself. The king's favorite said that the bites were left with a hunted girl when she was pulled out of the palace. The king was all the same thing happened there. He has partially reached his goal. You can calm down. Othello said that the main thing in this confession of the princess herself about the fact that she had spent the night with one of his slaves and toys. The same is exactly spoiled, and her relatives cannot do any claims. His Highness said that no matter what it was, and his bride is now spoiled, she should write a letter to her relatives and ask them to finally send wedding gifts and tangible assets. After that, Othello considered the right thing that the girl would then be taken to the Suyat. The girl will be in the dungeon by that moment. Captus read about it in the book. The conditions in her captive will be terrible. All who got to the dungeon lost their health. The terrible conditions began to destroy the human body. The book said that before his death, the girl's body was rotten and smelled very unpleasant and caused immediately. Captus thought that in her past life she was weak. The princess's book was also quite slightly. But now she got a second chance, and she was not going to die, but would save her life. The princess said she honestly did not understand where she made a mistake, but now she has a good dowry. If the father and brother learn about her punishment, then they will turn everything she had given to her, and it will not reach Othello. Thus the girl believed that she would last a trilage, and as long as the king is dealt with everything, she can even escape from her captivity. The cape said she would even work a maid in his castle. She also added that she was not ready to become part of the harem, and she feels that she is not worthy of doing so. The girl now asked for work for herself. Liv fell on his knees around his highness. He agreed to the conditions. The girl was cleaned on the hallway. She was difficult, but she thought it was better to be like to die at the executioner. At the moment, she became a servant of Harium. For this, she was alternatively grateful to Liv, a favorite. As if hearing her thoughts, the servants poured a new slave with water. They rejoiced that the girl was on the very bottom and forced to turn from the princess to ordinary low, cost service. They walked past the girl, mocking. The princess of such a small country as Suyat was not suitable for anything better than being a servant. The captain promised to herself that she would take revenge for being offended. He broke off the sound of a loud fall. The girl saw one of the officials who were mocking her on the floor. She realized that inadvertently spilled water, which caused one of them to fall. The captain replied that she actually used a soap solution to clean the floor. One of the victims asked why apply it with such a thick layer on the floor. They have long discussed this girl from the Suyat, who is not really capable of anything. The girl replied that she never washed the floor, because the princess is not obliged to do so in her possession. When the girls went to do their own business, the captain thought that they needed. After all, there was no person in this palace who could sympathize with her. They all deserved punishment. Suddenly, the princess remembered her rescuer, the fuzzy image of a handsome man put before her look. He was so gentle and responsive that no one was with her. For a long time, the princess did not know grace. But she frightened her that she didn't even know who he was. After all, she could not guess whether he was a friend or an enemy, and that he actually pursued and managed his actions. The motives of the stranger were incomprehensible. Enemies poisoned in the military camp. The assistant realized that their opponent finally began to think of his head and began to grease the weapon with poison. The knight ordered to reject panic and more concentrate on the antidote. The owner ordered the young man so that he would not delay the preparations. After all, many of them could get more than the high commander of the wound. The boy replied that the knight would still spend at least 3 days in bed. The man was very upset. He promised a girl who rescued that he would return in 3 days. It is worth following this term because he made a promise, and he was very fond of seeing her. The young man began to guess it. The knight replied that it had not happened to him before. The only thing he understood was that he would no longer make such promises to a young lady who still fell into his soul, and the position of the poor was deplorable. The owner ordered the young man to turn into an owl and go to his palace. There he had to watch the girl and make sure that everything will be fine with her. In addition, he had to pass the letter to strangers. The assistant executed the order of Loden's. He sat in the likeness of owls on a tree and looked carefully at all that happened from below. The maids were mocking the girl who liked his master and for which he was afraid. Liv and one of the officials again began to shout at the princess. They accused her of not wanting to do anything. The king's favorite has ambiguously recalled the opportunity to go to the executioner. The captain heard the story of a ghost who lived in this palace. His peculiarity was that he came to strange places. The princess became embarrassed by the fact that she heard, and the defender never appeared. Owls tired of listening to quarrels. Liv ordered the girl to wash the floor and steps, which were to keep. The assistant was painful to hear such bullying, and he flew very low, even touched the wing of the left. The assistant sat in the bushes around the palace. Finally, it became clear how the captive was called. He will definitely tell his master. He decided to read the letter from Loden to the princess. From the letter, it became clear that the owner had managed to look with the girl at night at the starry sky, and the man liked it. He gave much weight to this moment. However, it was important now to save the night. It was necessary to stop reading the letter and returning. It was strange to read such a letter from the great warrior and the lord of the army. The person who did not accept the message from Loden himself did not believe in authorship. The young man tried to somehow remember more of the girl's appearance. However, he is not ready to say that the girl was different from many young girls. But something special in it was for sure because she captivated Loden. The assistant decided to break the letter from his master. The young man thought that the appearance of this girl in the life of his master can provoke too many changes that would be undesirable for the future world and the continent. The captain was brought to the snow palace. She stared at the walls of this building. Liv and her assistant stood from afar. The princess asked if they would not control her. Liv replied that ghosts were found there. They will remain on the street, and later they will come to take the finished work. She said that often people went there and less often someone came out. It was strange to hear the same. After all, she remembered last night, and nothing like this was observed. Inside the castle had a good approach and did not give any horror on his guests. But it could be at first glance, and then she felt bad. The captain opened the door. Behind them she saw the intertwined creepers, which really had a terrible appearance. The plants seemed to be tried to hide from sunlight, which broke through the open door. The comrades of Capet went even further and insisted that she was doing faster. So now there was no choice. The girl thought, the worst death of the executioner from death in the snow castle from the ghost. The girl made his way between the creepers. She could not understand where this plant came from in this house. After all, that evening there was no such thing. But it could also be on the drug from the drugs of Liv, then accepted. The captain saw an old abandoned room. She once was quite a lot. But time passed. No one visited here, and everything was impressed that there was a fire that had destroyed a lot. The girl started cleaning. Everything around the subconscious level was pointed to Lades. The princess was cleaned in the room because she planned to put away here. She was able to do it despite her origin. Princess knew that it was now in the world of books, and Loden was the cousin of the king and the son of Caesar, his brother of the deceased king. It was in these choirs that a great warrior and a future ruler had to live. According to the treaty, after the death of the old king of Ute, his father Sneza, his younger brother Caesar had to become the king. But the turn of the throne has changed suddenly and not expected for anyone. But the woman of the late king was quite ambitious and sought for power. For that. To put her son on the throne, she has made a lot of effort. It was this woman who set fire to Caesar's castle and tried to destroy it. The son of a woman after that lived not long. One day he fell out of a horse, although he was considered a wonderful rider. The fall was deadly to a young heir. The same mother began to rule and tidy up in the country. On the deathbed, she handed over to her only grandson, Otello. The legends said that all human in Othello died in his childhood when he saw a grandmother burning the castle and his father was tormented before his death. They also gossiped that Othello had problems with his hand since his childhood. He also replaced it with an artificial iron. This could be the cause of its bad nature and further cruelty. His brother Loden hated Othello after the death of his parents. In addition, he decided to devote himself to training and prepared his own obsidian army. It was because of this that he tried to take revenge. Much began from the moment Loden brought the land on the border and military manner brought the land of the king himself. Many soldiers began to talk about his ability to become a ruler. And one day happened what Othello was afraid. Loden gathered the warriors and all the common people ready to follow him, raised the uprising. His purpose was to reset the king of the tyrant and become the ruler of the kingdom of dark lands. The book stated that Othello would receive his own, and now the captain had to be his slave. Although the king did not want her as a kingdom, but now he did not want to see her with him as a wife or queen. No woman has officially married Othello. The same, only her, capture, will be considered in the textbooks by his only queen and legal wife. But she also didn't want to. It is a dubious celiba. The girl also mentioned that after her death, Loden would go to Capras, the thought that he had loved her and made so from despair and suffering from unrequited love. The girl immediately rejected this idea. With regard to whether feelings with Loden were possible, the captain believed that the lack of memories of relationships indicated their absence. The work was done faster. But despite all, the girl believed that she would not have the chance to cross with some Loden. After all, she is just a servant, and this status will remain with her for a long time. The same idea for this was very gloomy. There was a stir in the military camp. The soldiers were talking about something actively. They were concerned and thought that their commander was sick, and they did not want to get rid of their commander in war. Loden was already trying to get out of bed. His body was still weak, but the knight made quite a strong-willed effort to overcome attacks of pain and poor health. The thought of the promise was spinning in the head. One of the guards of the tent, which housed the commander's headquarters, asked his owner to stop and stay a little. After all, instead of 3 days, the man rested only 1.5 days. The commander asked how many giants they killed during the campaign. The assistant replied that 11. Loden said that all the army is now going to the capital. The soldier asked if it was retreat. The commander assured that they were going for money. After all, they are vital for further continuation of the hike. The same king had no right to refuse him. Saldia gave command to the meeting. The captain was cleaned in the room when she heard a strange sound. He was constantly repeating, and every time he has increasingly attracted attention to himself. The girl looked around, but she saw nothing. The sound did not stop. After short searches, the princess found a book. She was about magic. According to the text, it was possible to draw conclusions about the fact that in this world there were spirits and magic existed. Some of the people could use it. But for this, the condition was the possession of a part of blood of the spirits by the person itself. The princess wondered how to determine that it has part of the spiritual. Hard reflections began to overwhelm her head. Othello listened to his soldier's report. He talked about shackles who found in the garden for slaves. It seems that they were cut with a sword or a very sharp axe. It happened around the fountain in the Garden of Pleasures. The security guard also stressed that it was done with one blow. The owner of the sword was quite chunky and skillful. The king, meanwhile, thought someone dared to sound his order and disposal. The soldier himself was ready to punish the punishment for failing to monitor the safety of the harem of His Highness. It is also not worthy of serving and serving your boss faithfully. Bishop raged. He ordered other guards to take this soldier and take him to the dungeon where his hands cut off. The man shouted loudly and asked him to forgive him and not punish. But the will of the king was not good. Othello raged. He was interested in the question of who died his new pet. Someone was not afraid of his royal will and intervened in his garden, where it was forbidden to anyone except the king himself. Another of His Highness' advisors said Sir Loden arrived in the capital at the head of a small detachment hardened in the battle of soldiers. It did not herald anything good for the king himself, who hid the money in the war. The king said that the commander seemed to have recently been going to the war against the giants. The advisor agreed, but there were problems on the front due to insufficient supplies and lack of funding. The man began to talk something about the Alliance's army and the Obsidian army, and His Majesty interrupted it. He said that the army of Obsidian belongs personally to Loden, so the question of its provision is not his business. Othello was well aware that his opponent was a much better warrior and ruler. The soldiers loved him, the ordinary people respected him for military honor and loyalty, and the servants thought of betrayal. Advisors and nearby worshipped their ruler. They thought not to angry the king and not get him under his hot hand. But now the situation has become tense. Everyone talked about their loyalty. Suddenly he guessed in his husband's head. His rival returned 4 days ago to the capital. It coincided with the abduction of his bride from the garden. It was one that night with a princess, and she was silent about it. The girl, meanwhile, studied the literature concerning magic and spirits. From there, she learned that there were 2 forms and races of spirits. One race was descendants of the white spirit, and others were scattered tribes and from the western lands. The captain realized that Loden would be able to take the throne with the help of spirits. But there was a question of whether the girl will agree to try herself as a magician. She would be able to escape using magical skills and methods. After reading part of the book, the girl realized that she learned the content of the book. It was necessary to try to read the spell and find out if she had the ability to magic. A mana with magical symbols rushed around her. The captain tried to spell teleportation, but of course nothing happened. The girl did not get upset because from the very beginning she did not claim. She heard some strange sound. Someone sounded. Liv or her assistant was searched by a girl. They reported that Othello wants to see her. The king was angry. He demanded that the bride be brought to his rooms immediately. She hid the magic book. The girl tried to remember everything she read about this man. In the book, the king ordered the head of the princess. You need to be careful with him and not play with fire. The captain decided to obey it and obey it. Othello asked the girl where the collar, which he wore her on the day she first got to his estate. He hinted that she should not invent, as if she had removed and handled it. The princess replied that she just fell asleep, and then the shackles disappeared. The king asked her not to lie. After all, he made the shackles that the girl was, and someone just cut them off with a sword at night. At the same time, His Majesty was forced to punish the head of the garden, where he was harem. The same punishment lies on her conscience. It is because of her guilt that the man will get rid of both hands and lose work. The king added that at one time he did not like it. The princess behaved confident and frankly. However, after a few days, Othello's attitude changed radically, for the better. He took the captain for his chin, looked into his eyes, and said that the girl had a chance to become a queen. She will have to become part of the harem, but in the future she will wear the crown of this kingdom. The princess refused. She shouted loudly that she would not happen. It is better to be a common servant than such a price will be the ruler of this worthless kingdom whose ruler is a pervert and tyrant. The captain was surprised. At one time, the memories of the girl and her literary heroine merged into one. And since then, she has felt a sense of dignity and importance. And even then she wanted to become an owner. But now she was convinced that she was expecting a great future, but not with Othello on the throne. The girl will wait for the right opportunity. After all, she learned to live with the wolves at one time, overcome their habits. The assistant reported that he had arrived latest with his own person. The king replied that let him invite him. It was wondering what he wanted to talk about. The girl tensed. Now the main character had to come. When the knight entered the room, the cape realized that the book had an accurate description of this man. His aura was filled with death and force. Everyone was considered a cold dragon around him and respected for his courage and roaring. The king congratulated his commander and asked if the gossip was lying about the knight injured. He replied that it was simply misinformation of the enemy. The smell of Othello did not really feel wounds or damage. Othello asked for such suspicion to be seen. His sources of information were again deceived and reported to him false information. But in general, it was even very good for everyone. In the meantime, the girl decided to leave the room as long as the men said something. But the voice of the ruler stopped her. The man wanted to cover the table and the owner of the table with the left and brought more wine. The king asked his knight if he could use wine. There was no injury. There were no contraindications for this. Loden agreed. He looked carefully at the monarch, who was clearly nervous. The knight guessed that his brother was not pleased to see a great master of war. After all, he came not just. Of course, he will require funds for his army and support. Liv danced. One enjoyed the dance and her body. It was like a fire in the human likeness. Her red hair, long and wavy, fell on her shoulders like a flame, which played in the beat of her movements. In every step, Every gesture of her body was a force that attracted and fascinated. Her dance was art. It had nothing unnecessary or tension. Everything seemed natural. The king and his guests sat at a long table. The conversation is poorly glued. Men believed that it was not necessary to sleep on the little things. The king's favorite was passionately and attractively danced in front of men. Othello lifted a high glass with wine and said it would be a test for Loden's life. The king considered the guest carefully to understand what he thinks. But the face of a warrior did not give emotions. The knight said that he proclaimed a healthy man for the monarch himself and the great ruler. On his face, even the soft did not move. Liv also tried to understand something from the knight. With the curtains of the shaft of the captain, she admired the beauty of the main character. It was the embodiment of chivalry and dignity. It was this man who was more like a king and a great ruler. According to the plot of the book, these two have now been in a friendly relationship. This was explained by the fact that the grandmother of the acting king hid the truth about the death of his parents and the tragedy with the castle. Bella told the boy that his family's castle had burned through the unsuccessful practice of Mother Loden's magical emanations, Holy Felicia, which was respected and equated with the saint. The king was more disturbed by Loden's desire to give up unnecessary lands and leave only those who belonged to his father. But in reality, all military exploits had the basis of the mother's search. Loden could not believe that his mother had disappeared. The efforts of the commander himself, not only in his possessions but also in the kingdom, have become much safer and more stable. The girl noticed that though the brothers are playing roles and trying to pretend that they are all right, but they hate each other and are right now to cling to their opponent's throat. A stranger was near the captain. She asked the servant who seems more beautiful, the king or the commander. But suddenly she answered the question. You need to regard them for kindness. After all, His Highness that the commander was great warriors and killed many people. The same decide which one is better is worth the indicator of kindness and human attitude towards others. The king called the girl. She began to be nervous. The captain was very afraid of this tone of His Highness. The ruler asked her if she was able to dance. This question put it in a dead end. Liv looked carefully at the king. She slyly gazed the shaft and expected his further orders. The favorite thought that the servant could not dance and would not give the pleasure of His Majesty. The cape said she could not dance. And besides, she is not a clown, but the left pulled her by the hand. The woman emphasized that the girl should dance if the master desires His Majesty. Loden looked carefully at this situation. He clearly did not like what was happening around, and he was angry with the attitude of the ruler to the princess. But he will not be able to influence it right now. To do so meant to conflict. Leave, meanwhile, put the girl in the middle of the hall and presented it. The favorite immediately warned that the girls from the Suyat are not famous for dancing and singing. Loden looked at the woman angry. It seemed an instant, and he would pounce on the king and cut him and his assistant. But the man held himself in his hands and just watched. He is sorry for the girl. The girl was swaying. She thought it was too much before Othello, but she had no other way out. After all, if she refuses now, it will continue to suffer from it. So the captain began to sing. Her singing was gentle and strange as for these places. The words of the song penetrated to the heart. The girl was surprised at where she learned to sing so well. Everyone around the princess listened with delight. Liv understood what exactly was the talent of women from the Suyat. No woman or a girl with a harem could not sing. Singing fascinated and summoned. Loden listened to the song and thought he was not mistaken when he saved the girl that night. She has never left his head since then. The king saw what happened to the warlord. Othello took a girl. He said that from the very beginning he wanted to take a wife from the Suyat. The captain did not expect such a situation, but she was given that her husband did it specifically. The king said he decided to leave this nightingale himself. His harem will become more attractive and beautiful. In order to get the knight even more, His Majesty asked how he believes. Loden's food seemed tightly, and the wine was bitter. His hand, which held a silver glass, was firmly compressed, though he tried to keep a calm look. However, his eyes were constantly following every movement of the king. He did not allow himself a word, because he knew no knight could challenge his king. But the anger and jealousy that boiled inside were so strong that it seemed, about it, they would spill out. The knight got up and left the hall. He said he left the question for consideration by the king himself. The girl was surprised. After all, she hoped for protection against the commander and did not think that he would just seem. Captus thought about Othello's amazing behavior. It seemed that he himself wants to meet in battle with the knight, and for that provokes it as soon as possible. Liv looked with hatred of a girl. She believed that this fool was taking her husband. The woman was scared to lose her status in the harem. After all, then her peaceful life will end. The king behaved like a fool. She believed that a slave was led by a lot, so it was time to lower it to the ground. The woman clung to her hair of the princess and said that she had dispersed very much, and she sent her to work as a servant. Liv came to the king. She wanted to ask him something. The woman asked why His Majesty needed this measurement of Ushka from the Suyat. After all, Othello had many beautiful girls and women from the whole kingdom. The favorite became a knee before the lord. He replied that the girl from the Suyat was one of the trumps, which he could manipulate and in every possible way to bounce him. After all, the commander came here not just. The king put his hand on his head. He told the woman that the issue did not concern the finances and supplies for the army. The purpose of the visit was different, and only one thing could be attracted here. And today Othello saw it. However, the king said that it was necessary to play a map of Loden's mother. The man had to make the commander to think that he knew something about the life of a woman who was called the mother of a commander and defender of the kingdom. It was in this way that he could have kept him for a long time that he headed the uprising. But it seemed that he no longer believed in it. The earth began to burn under the feet of its highness. The throne began to move. Loden was without shackles when he was not controlled. Therefore, it is worth finding a new weakness of this famous knight. But no one has heard anything before that the brother could be interested in someone of women or girls. Liv did not understand how the princess was connected here. After all, they were not even familiar with each other. The king replied that he just guessed, but he has already seen everything he needed in Loden's eyes. Loden stood on the balcony. He thought about the events of today. The girl recognized the knight immediately, but for him it was still a mystery how to do the right thing. So far, he was not able to speak openly. The doubts broke him from the inside. Never before the great commander has felt so broken and helpless. He always tried to follow the goal and the plan on how to achieve it. Suddenly he heard the sound of steps approaching him. Someone went to the place where he stood, a terrace. The same knight did not resist, not to look at the one who would break his calm and worry at such an hour. His surprise was no limits when he saw a princess in front of him. The girl did not expect to see the main character of the book. She felt some concern about their meeting. The captain looked carefully at the knight. He had much softer facial features than it was in the banquet hall. He liked the girl very much. The man asked if she saw. The princess did not understand the question. The commander smiled at her. The book was described in general differently, and he continued to ask her whether she believes. The first meeting was very surprised. She expected a little different development. Lewis seemed much calmer to her than writing about it in books. If you remember the beginning of the book, in childhood, he was not different talent or gifts. The boy grew quiet and closed. It was so typical for him at the age that the courtiers even tried to tease him and make fun of him in the presence of the king and the ruling top. But over time, everything has changed. From a silent and patient boy, he became quite delayed. He was cold and determined on the battlefield. The enemies were afraid of him and respected. Outside his eyes, he was called a dark genius who took the souls of the enemy. The knight approached the girl. He explained that he was injured in the battle with a weapon treated. The poison did not come out, and in addition, mixed with alcohol, consumed at the table. Loden asked the princess to help him. The girl realized that before the king he was just flashing, but she was worried that the commander is actually injured, and it is no bravado before someone. She just couldn't refuse him. After all, in the future he will thank for a saved life and will keep it alive. The man reached for a girl. It was very heavy in armor, but the captain was firmly on his feet. The princess led him the stairs of the palace. The guard looked at them carefully but did not approach. The girl said that the gentleman drank a lot. She will bring it to the house, because otherwise he can just fall somewhere. The captain asked where to lead it. Something began to turn to her, but Loden replied that he perfectly understand everything that is happening around. The girl began to guess something. Memories emerged from her sleep. The man smiled and reassured her. The princess, meanwhile, thought that when she brought him beyond the gate, she would be able to take advantage of it and escape from this place. Loden seemed to read her thoughts. He decided to ask if she was really ready to become a queen, whether it was her only desire and purpose of life. The captain hurried to deny. For some reason, she was ashamed of what she had told then. and how she ran in the banquet hall during the reception. The girl could not tell that it was her primary desire after she had reborn. She was now clearly aware that it was not her purpose and desire at all. Her real desire was to live in a family which would have harmony and mutual respect. From her childhood, she lived with her mother in a beautiful castle. The father often visited them. Childhood was happy and calm. Parents loved her and they loved each other. The father did everything he was needed for the well, being of the whole family. But her mother's death changed a lot. It was then that the girl got into the real world. Here she saw a terrible secret. Her mother was not a real queen. The woman was a king's mistress, and the baby was considered extramarital and had no title. The captain itself was not a princess. Simply, many specifically called it, because he sought to take advantage of her favor and patronage. The real wife of the king died, leaving behind her son and daughter. And the captain was not considered a member of the throne line. Her mother lived all these years in the palace as an animal they used. My father did not love her, but simply kept her death and death. On the deathbed, the woman advised her daughter not to repeat her mistakes. When she falls in love with someone from the royal family, he should become a real wife. And you should not listen to your father constantly and do his will. But shortly after his mother's death, the girl was called a princess. This title was more purely nominal. My father and her brother wanted her to become the wife of the king of eternal darkness. No one wanted happiness. Brother said she would not become a princess or queen if she does not find the right groom. And if she does not manage to conquer the hearts of the king of the land of eternal darkness, then she does not agree more. The girl was crying. After all, her brother reminded her of the fate of the dead mother. The girl was afraid of such a fate. She did not want to be a slave and constantly obey someone and vainly live her life. But she agreed to it. The girl thought that it would be better for her to be reborn much earlier. Then she would play her role, but would avoid this unwanted and horrific marriage with this tyrant and pervert. Now her attention was attracted by the gates leading from the palace to the city. The release has never been so close to her. But something stopped her. Some unknown feeling kept her from an ill-advised and dangerous act. Right in her eyes to the night flying a bird. But it did not pass a few seconds as the owl turned into a young man. The capture thought it had to be the assistant of the ruler. Loden himself ordered not to shout or attract attention. The man explained to the princess that his assistant and page had the ability to degenerate into a bird. The girl thought that one thing to read about the same in books, and another thing to meet with the same lev. The young man did not waste time just like that. He said he explored everything around. It will be very difficult to snatch a girl. The palace and quarters around him were very well guarded. The same as the captain. The girl already guessed that now the knight will be sent to his own possession. Today, she will never fall beyond this damn palace. She joked what she would wait. The emperor's guard blocked the exit from the palace. The numerical detachment of the guards stood opposite the Liwar and his assistant. The young man asked that he needed from his ruler to these soldiers. He did not expect anything good. The captain guessed that something had to happen now. Maybe His Highness went to meanness and decided to get rid of his main opponent until he could repel him. But how the story will change afterwards. A young man came out in front of the guards' detachment. He had a proud look and spoke very loudly. This type was the younger son of one of the aristocratic families. So now he wants to stop the knight who encroached on the king. To all, he added that it was just delighted with the reputation of Sir Loden and would like to try to fight him. That is, the young man demanded a duel with the knight who was fond of. The assistant disagreed with that. Loden himself told the assistant that it was actually Othello's order. In this way, he wants to find out how strong his opponent is. This boy would never have dared on such a desperate step. The girl carefully followed the course of events. She was scared of the knight, but the man behaved thoughtfully and carefully. Loden would not have lived so much for his life if he had not been a partially diplomat. He said he respects the young captain of the guard, but now he has drunk at the reception in His Majesty, but cannot resist the commander of His Highness. Loden asked to move the duel to later. Instead, the knight offered a match with his assistant. The captain was confused. This proposal offended his honor by something, and the young man added that he would even get the sword to get the enemy, then the battle will start. The commander was angry, but even a second did not pass when the assistant Loden stood behind the cheeky commander. He put the knife to the throat of the man and held him firmly. The king's servant was nervous. His soldiers began to lower the spears and prepare for the attack. The faces of people were closed with helmets. But now the decisive stage has come. but they did not decide to attack. The enemy was too fast and skilled, and the helper of the knight asked his opponent whether such a demonstration was enough, and he advised no longer to squeeze against the knight. After all, they just returned from the war with the animals, the same tired. Loden himself entered the conversation. He ordered the assistant to finish because the owner was very tired and wanted to lie down. None of the guards dared to break the silence that reigned around the maiden. The captain thought that the men were very cool. Even the knight's assistant was a very skilled warrior. He immediately defeated Captain Guard. Their match lasted less than a minute. It is not the engine that Othello was so treated with these SIBs. The girl looked after the soldiers who were freely passing the gate. She began to understand why the king sent Loden and his army to the hottest points of the war. He hoped that the knight would no longer return from the next hike. Loden asked Jay about whether he sent that letter to the girl as he asked. The servant reproached the owner that he was poisoned and drunk wine or any alcohol. This could not be done. The boy explained that he had heard about a girl who had fallen into the heart of a knight, that she was sent from a bustle for Othello. She was a princess there, who was to help conclude the preparations between the states. Her family expected that with the help of an illegitimate daughter, they would become allies of the kingdom of darkness. Now it is worth thinking that Othello will destroy not only the knight but also a girl if she learns about something. Loden said he would not allow it. He will first destroy his enemy. Jay replied that you should not forget about the search for Mother Sir Loden. He replied that he had already lost hope that he was finding Holy Felicia. The latest information about the approximate location of the knight's mother was the gossip that the woman was and the towers of golden shine. Just every time they came to the search, they were sent to the war. Loden wanted to believe that his mother was somewhere in another city, but most likely everything goes away that the woman has died a long time ago, and all his search is just a myth or fantasy. Despite the fact that the bodies were not found, suddenly the owner said that the girl's eyes have the same look as his mother's eyes. It was a sign of the holy tribe. Legends about him told his mother as a child. The eyes were a symbol of reincarnation of the goddess of water. The man was 100% convinced that the blood of the spirits flows in the veins of the princess, which gives her huge magic forces. The assistant could not believe that in search of what they spent many years was found. Lotzen replied that Princess Suyat was very important for them, like Satya himself, and the knight had to take possession of it, not allowing Othello to torture in a dungeon or prison. Jay just wanted to confess to the owner when he completely fell on him. The young man is amazed at how much his master drank in the evening, but it was frightened that the man had a strong heat and fever. In the palace, the cape heard that she would no longer sleep in the room for servants. After all, the king called her a possible queen. Now she needs to move to another room. It should no longer do work. Women have not lost the opportunity to slap it. They assured that now it was time to move to the favors. But the whole point was that the room was not prepared for her. The girl walked the yard, holding her bed. She realized that none of the servants would recognize her owner if the king himself did not interfere for her. And from Othello it was not necessary to expect. The cape decided not to go to the king's palace. She wanted to rest in the palace of Melt Snow. After all, she cleaned there. The same should be clean and cozy. And instead of tolerance of bullying, she will spend the night with the ghost. The girl decided for herself that from now on it would be her hiding place, and she will constantly hide from other servants and annoying girls who will try to humiliate it. She fell asleep directly in the hallway. Captus thought that the king was a scoundrel. Her thoughts were spinning around Sir Loden. He was a much better character than it was described in the book. He was a handsome man in a young age. The girl believed that something extraordinary was hidden in his eyes. She just couldn't forget them. Even seeing him for the first time, the girl guessed that there would be something between them, some connection and a thread. Now, for some reason, did not sleep. She thought about what to do and do next. The escape plan began to emerge on its own. It was not an option to escape through the main gate, and recently someone looked with her. The book stated that Loden was older than his brother for 5 years. From childhood, they usually played and communicated very close. These two studied the sword and military affairs together. For some reason, the girl remembered the past life. At that time, her family was not very interested in her. Cynicism and hypocrisy prevailed in family relationships. The captain stopped herself. It is not necessary now to regret yourself. The princess realized that she did not have time to decide with the question of her salvation. She turned to the Book of Magic. The girl wanted to try something to learn and master magical skills. Again, the cape tried to master teleportation and levitation. The vase on which she was training began to move poorly. The girl came to the conclusion that you just need to exercise more in using magic. The princess drowned the stairs. They were very high and did it unknown. She has never visited that part of the palace. Over time, it rose higher and higher. It seemed to be eternity. Finally, the captain thought that something was wrong with these stairs. They did not end, and he did not lead anywhere. From somewhere the sound came, as if a frog was saying somewhere. The princess was very afraid. After all, she did not like these creatures since childhood. The frog spilled on the face of the princess, which caused the panic attack. She didn't know what to do. She tried to tear the animal away from her face, but she did not work. Her efforts were in vain and did not benefit. The princess fell beyond the stairs. It fell at great speed. The fall was delayed. The second captain awaited contact with the earth, but that didn't happen. The girl began to think that something was wrong. She was saved by prickly creepers which appeared from nowhere. She thought it was just a dream, so it really was. It all dreaming of a poor princess, tired of a difficult thing. But everything around seemed so familiar. The girl woke up. There was a frog on Ohila. She looked carefully at the princess. But it was strange that the frog was in Salfetka, and it was she who actually felt the sound of her croaking in her sleep. The book said that Bella still invited Caesar and his wife to the palace. She said they had to resolve the issue of throne inheritance. It had to take a little time and patience, and it was in the palace of Melt Snow that the family decided to stop. Hence the rumor that ghosts and ghosts live in this house. But the girl did not feel anything suspicious throughout the night. The ghosts did not bother her. The princess began to guess that this terrible atmosphere wanted to use it against it. And right now, it is time to take advantage of enemies for their further survival and solving the problem. The cape explored the palace rooms. There were really a lot of them. The frog made a company to the girl. But the traces of Loden's last stay with relatives disappeared many years ago, and there was no one else. Finally, the captain reached a room where there were many easel and drawing accessories. It was an art studio. The girl knew that the aristocracy loved to do something similar and just fanadel from art. The captain finally dropped off the picture. It was a family portrait of Loden's family. The father was proudly stood in his son, and a charming woman, Fig, sat next to them. To be a mom of the family. The girl saw that Loden's mother's eyes were very similar to her eyes. For some reason, the girl wanted to clean this picture. The boy in the portrait was a very beautiful and decent child, what you won't say now. Captus looked out of the window around. There was a failure in front of her. There was no window on the wall except she used. That is, this tower had nowhere to go unnoticed. You can be sure. The cape realized that the Caesar's family would not be able to escape. Most likely they really died. But it remained a secret how Louis himself was able to survive. This mystery has long been interested in her. The frog laughed and splashed to the side. It seemed that she asked for a girl to follow her. The animal pointed to another door that led from the room unknown where. The girl saw a room where she spent the first night. The frog really got to where she was with her rescuer. The frog ordered her voice to look in the box that stood in the middle of the room near the bed. The captain thought that in this chest the little one could hide from the fire, but in this case he just could suffocate. For some reason, looking into the chest was scary and exciting at the same time. The girl couldn't hold back from it. The frog pushed the girl in her back. The captain fell to the box. In fact, he was much larger inside than it seemed. The princess was scared. She became awkward that the insidious animal would lock it inside.